Welcome to Biscuits and SEC's Week 9 preview. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about how severe Michigan should be punished. All of that. We're going to bring the guys in from Biscuits and SEC right now. We got the boss man, we got the hammer, and we are going to talk some, I don't know, it's a slow weekend of football, but there's a couple of games that we can see and kind of be interested in. So before we get started, though, this Michigan situation and this magical spy network that was created by somebody that would put himself underneath the poverty line if he acted alone. I think Jim Harbaugh either had to know about the biggest cheating scandal since SMU, or this is the biggest case of lack of institutional control I have ever seen. What say you, boss man?
I don't think it's lack of institutional control. I mean, we've seen now screenshots and all these, big reporters now are even getting in on it, showing that these coaches had laminated play sheets with signs, for defensive coaches and Connor Stallions, the assistant who's being accused in these alleged schemes being right next to, Michigan's defensive coordinator. So I think Michigan's in hot water. I mean, I don't think there's any way that this doesn't go all the way to the top with Harbaugh. They're kind of given the plausible deniability, as you should, right? Any of these old bag schemes from back in the day in the SEC or any other conference, it was always plausible deniability. The head man can always deny it and say that he really didn't know what was going on when everyone knows the truth, that they're the one that really directed it and then just kind of said, now keep it quiet. And it has to go through a couple funnels to get to me. What I find really interesting about this is it's made me laugh. Hank and I have talked about it over the past couple of days since this news broke, is that, they initially said, oh, this guy was a military guy and he was, I think graduated from West Point or something like that. He has military background. And this is the most cockamamie, ridiculous scheme that you've ever seen. We've got Venmo transactions from his personal Venmo. He's buying tickets under his own exact name. I mean, if they were trying to hide this, they were hiding it in plain sight. No, they really didn't seem to care that they, were just kind of doing this out in the open. It was not well thought out if they wanted to hide it at all, which they should have been wanting to hide it because it's obviously against NCAA rules.
Yeah. And Hammer, you have a situation where if he was a captain of a ship, if Harbaugh was a captain of a ship and he was taking a nap one night and one of his first mate or whoever runs the ship aground, do you know what happens to the captain in that situation?
Captain goes down with the ship, I believe. So he's the one who takes ultimate responsibility for what happens on that ship. And I think that's what we're going to run into here eventually, one way or another. Now, of course, speculation is Harbaugh notoriously flirts with the NFL. He may just take one of those opportunities should it present itself after this year. And this never really impacts him personally, I guess, aside from if he ever wanted to return to college, which if he left for the NFL, that I'm sure would be the last thing on his mind. So, yeah, it's an interesting situation. I don't really know what to think about it because, as Alex pointed out, he's going to have plausible deniability. I'm sure of that. He's not that stupid. But it almost looks like they were running the scheme for that sole purpose of, hey, this is so brazen and in the open. Once you peel back the first layer, that nobody's even going to believe Harbaugh was involved because of how clear it all was, right? It's like, hey, if Harbaugh knew, of course he wouldn't have told him to buy the tickets in his name, and he wouldn't be, standing in the third row of these games with his iPhone out recording. So I really don't know. I mean, the way I look at it is, if the NCAA is involved, it's going to take a very long time for anything to actually get done. So again, does this end up impacting Harbaugh, this current team? I really don't think so. But ultimately, it seems like there's enough evidence here that it's going to be a black eye, regardless of what happens the rest of the season, where Harbaugh goes after this. I think we're looking at similar to the Astros, where nothing really was taken away from them, but everyone just hated them, rightfully so, and blamed them for this cheating scandal. And I think that's probably what's going to happen to Michigan, where I don't exactly know how much is actually going to happen in terms of sanctions or on the field impact. And look, we've all been around enough scandals in NCAA to know that when you vacate wins, no one cares, right? The games were already played, so it doesn't really matter. So
I saw the box score.
Yeah. So I think that's probably what we're looking at here, but it's definitely a black eye. I mean, again, sign stealing goes on. Everyone tries to do it, but I genuinely do not believe there are many, if any, other schools out there that are sending a currently employed staffer to other games ahead of time to scout in person. That's over the top and pretty egregious.
Yeah, and if you ask Tennessee fans, he was also working for South Carolina because Michigan was afraid of Tennessee, and so
I saw that Tennessee fans were up in arms about the officiating a week ago against Alabama.
They're always up in arms. They're always up in arms.
Right. And then a couple days later, now it's, well, you know what? We're collateral damage here because no way South Carolina could hang 60 on us without knowing the signals. So.
Although Spencer Rattler was about perfect that night. So he's like a different person. Anyway, let's get to the games this weekend. We got a few games. It's kind of a 5-game week in the SEC. There's 5 conference games, so it's kind of a short, small week. But we're going to start off with Tennessee at Kentucky. Tennessee is favored by 3.5 points. It's on ESPN. Game is at 7 o'clock Eastern. You have a situation with the Vols where, honestly, their defense is okay. Their offense can be okay, but it can be absolutely atrocious, Hammer.
Yeah. Look, I think we've been talking about this on here for a couple of weeks now. I mean, at the end of the day, Joe Milton is not Hendon Hooker. He's not a terrible quarterback, but he's just not nearly as consistent or accurate down the field. And the Tennessee offense this year, in particular, they ran the ball well last year, but this year in particular, that is what everything is built off of. If they can run the ball well, they're going to be okay. And Joe Milton, I think, plays a part in that. We saw a little bit of that in the first half of Bama, where even in the A&M game, you know, he can be effective on the ground if he wants to be, or if they want to get him involved there. But yeah, I mean, look, this is a tough spot. This is not an offense that I trust to go on the road and perform well. Kentucky's not Alabama, especially defensively, but they're not a terrible team, and they're competent enough to, you know, put some stops together. And if you're Tennessee, you're coming off of a tough game, a tough win against A&M, very tough loss to Alabama. And now you have to go back on the road to Kentucky. So I think it's a very tough spot for the Vols. I'm interested to see how they can respond.
Boss man, Joe Milton, he hasn't been the dude this year. He just hasn't been the dude. But you can't go to Nico because he's a true freshman. He's not ready either. The Vols just kind of are what they are, right?
Yeah, I mean, they are what they are. I think you're exactly right on that. And I think the same can really be said, though, for Kentucky. I mean, we've seen Devin Leary now for 8 weeks, and it hasn't materialized. It hasn't looked good with this Liam Cohen offense. You know, I was looking at it today as I was writing our previews for Biscuits and SEC.com, and Tavian Robinson is the leading wide receiver with 338 yards through 8 weeks of the season. They've been spreading the ball around a little bit if you look down their stat sheet, but that's not what I expected out of this offense, you know, to this point in the season. I expected Devin Leary to be really throwing the ball around. I kind of bought into the hype. He looked really good at NC State when he was healthy. So maybe he's not fully healthy. Maybe, you know, the shoulder didn't heal as they hoped it would. But that's not really an excuse at this point. He's been playing all this time. You know, I heard on ESPN, and when they were playing Missouri a couple of weeks ago, they were talking about how his system when he was at North Carolina State was a little bit more tempo versus the one that they're running at Kentucky, and that he ran that in high school as well. And so he's more comfortable in systems like that. And that just hasn't been what Liam Cohen's wanted to do this year, and it really hasn't meshed well. So I think we're looking at two teams really who are who they are at this point. And it's just going to be, I mean, I wrote this today. Really, to me, it's just about who can be the battering ram and go down the field more with either Ray Davis on Kentucky's side, or on the other side, you got Jabari Small, Jalen Wright, and Dylan Sampson when they get into short yardage and goal line situations. So that's really what I think it comes down to. And when I look at this game, I think I don't trust either quarterback, and I really trust the Tennessee running game more than I do the Kentucky running game, and I trust Tennessee's defense a little more than I do Kentucky's defense to be able to stop that run game.
Something's interesting happening this season that hasn't happened. I guess it's because of the last year of the contract. But the game that gets kind of left alone, if there's an opening that you can leave a game alone, is the 11 o'clock ESPN game. That is the game that is getting left alone. There's nobody competing with that. Now, the CBS game, you've got the cocktail party, and then you got Mississippi State and Auburn, and they both kick off at the same time, which is different than what they used to do. I think that is fairly interesting. But we'll talk about the Mississippi State Bulldogs and the Auburn Tigers right quick. Mississippi State went up to Arkansas and played a football game that made the Iowa Hawkeyes look like the Miami Dolphins. That is what happened in that game. Mississippi State actually fumbled the ball. Arkansas recovered it, ran it in for a go-ahead touchdown, but the play was blown dead because Mississippi State false started. And I think that is a nice euphemism, boss man, for how that game went.
It was. I mean, I got to watch the first half of that game, and to be honest with you, I couldn't watch any more of it. It was so ugly. And we've seen a lot of ugly games in the SEC this year. I mean, look, Hank and I are Aggies, so we've watched the Aggies play some ugly games too, in terms of penalties and sloppy play. And Mississippi State had a bunch of snaps that were going, in the dirt for Mike Wright, even snaps that were, rolling to him in the end zone when they're about to get sacked for a safety. So that was just a really, really ugly game. And it was just the perfect play to just show how sloppy of a game that was, that, the go-ahead touchdown gets called back because the wide receiver wasn't set. Man, those are just two bad teams right now. It's just the truth. And now we're going to see it again with two more bad teams, because the truth is that Auburn is not a good team either. I was looking it up today. In Power 5 games this year, which I think Auburn has played 5 Power 5 games this year so far, and that includes the Cal game at the start of the year. Peyton Thorne has 2. He has 2 100-yard games. One of them is 100 exactly, and then the other one is 102 yards. So Auburn can't pass the dang ball. And they can run the ball a little bit. They're a little bit better in the running game, but they cannot pass the ball. So it's a toss-up to me. I have no clue who should win this game. The only reason I ended up going with Auburn is the fact that it's at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Like, if it's at Jordan-Hare, I feel a little bit better that Auburn has a chance to pull this out. I think the 6.5 line is pretty nuts to me. I don't see Auburn winning a game by 6.5 unless it's Samford, all season. So I'm going with Auburn in this one, but I don't feel good about my pick. I have no idea who's going to win.
Hammer, whenever I looked at this game, I was like, okay, if Mississippi State scores 10 points, can Auburn score 17? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, but can Mississippi State score 10 is the problem, because Mike Wright is not doing very well himself.
No. I mean, as Alex just said, nothing on either one of these offenses is going well. So in writing our previews earlier today on biscuitsandSEC.com, I wanted to see what these two schools were passing offenses in the entire country, right? Because, we focus mostly on the SEC. Obviously, you do too, Steven. So I knew they were bad, but I didn't exactly know in context of the entire country how bad they were. It's not good. Auburn is 121st in the country in passing offense at 151 yards a game. Mississippi State is 96th at 203 yards a game. But to make that even worse, Stephen, as you pointed out, Mike Wright is the current starting quarterback. And look, Will Rogers was not having a good year, but I definitely trust him to throw the ball better than I do Mike Wright. So this game to me is going to be very similar to watching a service academy matchup, except they don't run the triple option. So they're going to be trying to run legitimate college offenses that they are just incapable of actually running. So
just say Iowa. Just say Iowa.
Yeah, Iowa. It's going to be extremely ugly. I think you're going to see a lot of, you're going to pull up the box score, right? And it's going to be punt, 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 fourth down, turnover on downs, fumble. It's not going to be pretty. As Alex said, the game is at Jordan-Hare. I think Auburn will win. I do not trust them to cover a 6.5-point spread, but I think with the game being at home, they find a way to win. But it's going to be one of the just ugliest games, I think, in the entire season, SEC-wise. It's going to be dirty.
Yeah. It's Jarquez Hunter versus Woody Marks, and that's about it.
Correct.
Yeah. And Woody Marks is still kind of banged up, and he had a rod on the back of his leg last week. That's kind of why another reason I trust Auburn.
Yeah, the back of his leg looks like a bike chain or
Yeah.
something. It's like, what is going on? We know some like crazy engineering stuff in Mississippi State, but like, what are you doing? Was that a bungee cord? What's going on?
Yeah.
It's absolutely bizarre. Okay. Same time of day, a little bit better football game. I don't think it's going to be very unpredictable, but Georgia is playing against Florida in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party in Jacksonville. Georgia is going to play without Brock Bowers. I think this is Georgia's first game without Brock Bowers, so we get our first look at that. Florida can't throw the ball more than 5 yards downfield, and if you can't throw the ball downfield more than 5 yards, Kirby Smart usually eats you alive. Georgia is only favored by 14.5 points. Am I silly to think that Kirby Smart's going to run away with this 28, 35 points?
Hard to say. Your point stands that Florida cannot throw the ball more than 5 yards downfield. And we've seen them in the games outside of the Tennessee game, which more and more looks like an aberration. But, against Utah and then against Kentucky, the two decent teams they have played so far, the Florida offense looked really, really bad. I give Billy Napier credit, at least to a certain extent, right? Because the team is 5-2, and it's clear talent-wise they're not where Florida typically is, right? Mertz is very limited. Other than Pearsall, I don't think they have a ton going for them at wideout. And Pearsall is, he's made some incredible catches downfield, but he's not a guy, in my opinion, that is going to get a ton of looks downfield. He's much more of your slot guy, screen pass. He makes his living within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, by and large. So yeah, I think Georgia defensively is going to be able to stop Florida from really doing anything. What I'm interested to see is the Brock Bowers thing. So I do think there's a chance for a backdoor cover here from Florida, because I just don't know what Georgia's going to look like without him. Carson Beck has actually played extremely well. And, despite what Georgia message boards would say, their offense has been, by and large, very good this year. But Brock Bowers is a massive, massive part of that. So I'm just curious to see what they look like without him. I think this game is either a big blowout by Georgia and they cover with ease, or it's one of those games where it's never in doubt, but Florida is within 2 to 3 scores. Again, maybe a backdoor cover. But, there's dudes everywhere on Georgia, and there's very few dudes on Florida. That's kind of the way I look at it, right? Talent-wise, it's a no-brainer. So Georgia's going to win this one. It's just a matter of how close Napier can keep it. And obviously, the closer he does, the better, the message boards will be after that, because they're not going to be happy either way. But a blowout would be not good.
Boss man, this feels like a Kendall Milton type game, right?
Yeah, I think so. Georgia's rushing attack has been different than it has in past years. They're still potent. And you look at the stat, it's kind of almost quietly, to me, like people have kind of just known that Georgia was going to kind of roll through. Their schedule early hasn't really been much to write home about, and people just expect Georgia to be rolling over. Rolling people. And for the most part, they have been. But you expect them to have like this one just, horse that they ride for most of the year. And they just kind of have had a stable of backs they've kind of rotated through. But, when you look up, they're averaging 172 yards a game. It's your Georgia, rushing offense that you're used to. So, yeah, I think it's a Kendall Milton game. I also, I'm looking – Hank mentioned Carson Beck. He's really started to turn it on. Again, you look up, they're averaging 337 yards a game through the air. Again, a lot of that's Brock Bowers, so I'm interested to see as well what that looks like. Can Oscar Delp, step up? And I know they've got another kid. The name's escaping me right now. But at the end of the day, like, they've also got Ra Thomas over there, and he started to get some looks. They've got Dominic Lovett. They still have Ladd McConkey. Like, they still have weapons all over the place. And so when you're lining up, weapon on weapon and kind of looking at the tail of the tape, Georgia just has more dudes. Like Hank said, there's too much talent for this team. I expect Florida to keep it close for a little bit. I do like the job that Billy Napier's done. It's pretty impressive, frankly, that they're 5-2 after what they endured in week 1 against Utah, and then again getting kind of curb stomped by Kentucky and Ray Davis just running all over them. But at the end of the day, I think Georgia's just too talented. I've got Georgia to cover here. I think they're going to win somewhere like 44-24, something like that.
Yeah, and it's a situation. Florida's got some losses coming. You've got the game against Georgia. You've got Florida State. You've got Missouri. You're getting to the point where it's like, hey, can Florida beat Arkansas to be bowl eligible? I mean, that's kind of the territory that we're into. And it looks like Billy Napier is going to be able to get it done. So good for them. And, hey, Florida has looked fairly decent. And, I mean, that's like the most backhanded compliment I could give. But they looked fairly decent. So, Boss Man, what storylines from week 9 are you looking at from all over the conference?
I'd go back to Texas A&M and South Carolina, just to kind of be a homer for a second. But this is a big game for both schools. You got Jimbo Fisher, whose seat is starting to get scouting hot. And whether or not, he gets fired at the end of this year, there's still a lot of games to play. So he wins out. A&M can be 9-3. I think folks will be a little bit, will be able to take a deep breath a little bit at 9-3 with the recruiting class that's coming in. But if you're looking at 8-4, A&M fans are not going to be happy about that. 8-4 is what they ran Kevin Sumlin out for. So 8-4 in year 6 is not going to cut it, and people are going to be pretty fed up. On the other side with South Carolina, you've got Shane Beamer, who South Carolina fans were expecting a much better year. I didn't necessarily think that in the preseason. I was looking at them to be kind of somewhere around 6-6, 5-7, probably, which is what they may end up, or maybe even below it, somewhere like 4-8. But after the momentum that they had over the past 2 years, and especially last year with the Tennessee win and the Clemson win to close the year, South Carolina fans were really thinking that this could be another, year where they win 8 games or where they get to 9 games, 9 wins. So his seat's going to start getting hot too a little bit. I think if they don't start winning, they've got Spencer Rattler, who's one of the better quarterbacks in the country, who's played well all year. They're kind of wasting him. It hadn't been a good year. They had a 5-star Nichols Harbor on the outside. He hadn't really been playing. And the excuse has been that, well, he doesn't know the offense. And I don't know if that's really an excuse. There's a lot of 5-star wide receivers that are freshmen that get playing time all over the country. Luther Burden, Evan Stewart. There's been many of them, over the years that have gotten playing time, and many that are playing right now. So I think people are starting to get a little bit annoyed with the antics. They can deal with it if you win. But if you're breaking your foot, kicking stuff, and you're blaming the refs and blaming your players in press conferences after the game, I think people get pretty tired of that if you're not winning. So we'll see. This is a big game for both teams. I don't expect either of these coaches to get fired at the end of the year, but the one who loses this game, their seat gets warmer.
What about you, Hammer?
Yeah, I'll take it outside the SEC to our future SEC brothers, the Texas Longhorns. So Quinn Ewers hurt. I think we're a little unsure of how badly, but he's going to be out a couple weeks at least. So I'm interested to see what goes on for 2 reasons. A, do we see Arch? Is that possible? And then B, I don't think we will, but it's possible. But assuming we don't, and they roll with Malik Murphy, I think they have 2 losable games coming up. BYU this weekend, they should probably be able to handle. I think BYU is pesky maybe, but I don't think they'll be able to win in DK.
I almost said with a straight face they beat Arkansas. Sorry.
That they did.
Arkansas fans, man. Oh.
But next week they get Kansas State, who is kind of coming into their own. I know, obviously, they lost to Missouri earlier this year, and I can't remember. They lost a conference game as well, but they only have one conference loss. So Kansas State presumably could be a big challenge for them. And I think when you look at Texas, what they have done since Alabama, there's been a couple games where they're just kind of playing with their food. They were tied with Wyoming in the fourth quarter. They were tied with Houston, or not tied, but almost lost to Houston last week. Got a lot of help from the refs on a spot. So I just, look, that's kind of like
Texas got help from the refs.
Yeah,
don't have to tell us twice.
Right. Yeah, if they're catching a break, we're on it. But yeah, I think they have a couple losable games coming up with a backup quarterback that look is talented, supposed to be good, but the number of times we've seen teams, A&M included, the starter goes down, you look at your backup, you're like, oh, he's pretty good, he'll be all right, and things don't go the way you think they're going to go.
Sometimes they're Max Johnson,
right? So interested to see how they do, and I think when it comes to the SEC this year, Texas losing another game would be good because they're a one-loss team. If they run the table, they are absolutely in. There's no chance a committee keeps a one-loss Big 12 champion Texas out. So them losing a second game would be very big for Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, all these schools that are still vying for that spot. So I think that's something to keep an eye on just as a storyline is how Texas looks without Ewers.
And Oklahoma probably needs to drop a game too.
They do. They definitely do.
Yeah. But it's going to be fun when all these teams are in the SEC and we start playing these games. I'm really looking forward to what 2024 can look like. But yeah, you're right though. The thing that I'm looking for is obviously the shirt that I'm wearing. Ole Miss needs to play like a top 10 team. They need to go out there, handle business, and get ready for A&M and Georgia because they handle Vanderbilt. You have A&M to get ready for potentially the Super Bowl against the Georgia Bulldogs, because if Ole Miss is 8-1 going to Athens, that is going to be nuts because there's already just the fan base is rising up. We have to just get through Vanderbilt because everybody's so excited about that A&M game and then the Georgia game, what it can be. Now, that's probably bad news for A&M fans, but yeah, they're up for it.
I was going to say, so speaking of the A&M Ole Miss game, we got bailed out that game is at 11 a.m.
Yeah, it was not going to be a primetime game because of Bama and LSU.
True. I'm just saying from an A&M perspective, and A&M's been getting 11 a.m. games for the last 2 years, rightfully so. We're not good. So I get it. But I saw that game at 11 a.m. and I thought, man, thank goodness, because I do not want to go in there at night with, a 7-1 Ole Miss team. Even 3:30. I mean, the noon 11 a.m. kickoff is much preferred from our perspective.
The last 20 home games, Ole Miss is 18-2.
Wow, that's impressive.
That's one of those is Alabama, and the other one is the Mike Leach Egg Bowl, the last one.
Oh yeah. I said that in our previews today that this could be a look ahead spot for Ole Miss. Not that I think they're going to lose it all, but maybe like you sleepwalk through the first half. And then Lane Kiffin comes in and, kind of reams you in the locker room, and then you come out and you crush him in the second half or something. I don't see him losing to Vanderbilt at all, but it is a spot where you got two massive ones ahead and you're feeling really good. Just, make sure you get this one.
I'm glad Ole Miss has Vanderbilt this weekend and not somebody like Arkansas.
Yeah.
Because Arkansas's offense is bad and everything, but they have the talent to actually just jump up and get you.
Right. They still have KJ Jefferson.
Yeah. He can put on a Superman cape. Sometimes, though, he tries to dive into the end zone from the 5.
He does do that every once in a while.
Every now and then.
The Superman cape is only halfway down his back. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So, anyway, this has been the Biscuits and SEC Week 9 preview. We talked a little bit about the games. We talked a little bit about Michigan. Hit subscribe. Whichever YouTube platform you're watching this video on. They'll enjoy it. And Biscuits and SEC, check their stuff out, their newsletter as well. What's the website, boss man?
It's biscuitsandsec.com. And if folks want to subscribe to the newsletter, it's just, you can find it on our website, but it's biscuitsandsec.com/newsletter. And we just write, kind of give you the news and notes of the day of what's going on. So if you're not chronically on Twitter like all of us are, you can get the news that's going on in the SEC.
All right. So that's Boss Man. That's Hammer. Thank you very much. And we'll see you guys next week.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.